This is the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast, brought to you by Thankflip GAMSAT. We're here to teach you how to smash the GAMSAT, get into medicine, and become a flippin' great doctor.
Welcome back to the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast by Thankflip GAMSAT. I'm Dr. Tom, founder and CEO of Thankflip GAMSAT. I'm doing a solo episode this week. Marie's off doing other things. She'll be back for next week. But so today what we're talking about is if you're doing sections 1 and 3 in a few weeks, then this episode is for you. Now, whether you're scoring well and you're doing quite well and you want the final refinements, we're going to help you. Whether maybe you've been studying for a little while now and you're struggling. Maybe you've realized that you're in over your head and you don't know what to do. You don't know how to increase your scores. You feel stuck. You feel like you've done everything. We're going to help you. We're going to talk about your situation, and maybe you're getting started now, and you're freaking out because it's there isn't much time, and you're wondering what can you do, and so we're going to cover that as well. So we're going to talk about today what's possible in the time that you have left. So how much can you actually practically do, and what difference can you make in the last few weeks for sections 1 and 3? We'll talk about what scores you should be getting at this point or aiming for in your practice test. We'll talk about what practice test scores mean for the actual GAMSAT, like how do they reflect? So what scores do you need now on your practice test to get a good score on the actual exam? We'll talk about the best ways to study right now, no matter where you're at. We'll talk about common mistakes that people make in sections 1 and 3 at this point in their preparation. And of course, there'll be some tips and resources and inspiration for you as well. Now, if you're one of our bootcamp members and you're listening to this, you're very welcome to listen. However, I would recommend you go use the bootcamp resources and classes at this point. You'll get far more out of that. But again, you're welcome to listen along here as well. And before we get into it, just a quick reminder to subscribe to this podcast, no matter however you're listening to it. That'd be really cool, and to make sure that you don't miss out on anything. And I'm also going to be giving you guys a whole bunch of different resources. I'm going to be referring to a bunch of resources because there's only so much we can cover today. And if you're interested in any particular kind of things, I'm going to refer to the show notes. I'm going to put a bunch of links in there. And the show notes, you can find those by going to thankflipgamsat.com/episode 12. That's the number 12. All right, so let's begin with practice test and knowing where you are at this stage and what you should be doing. And the best way to figure out how you're tracking, where you're up to, is to do a practice test under exam time. Now, here's a caveat on that, not just any practice test, because there's a whole bunch of crap out there. The only ones I recommend are the ACER papers and obviously our own practice papers, the Thankfully Bootcamp ones. I can't speak for any others. The ACER ones are the best, and then our boot campers have said that our ones are a great reflection of the GAMSAT, even more than some of the ACER papers, but again, I'm biased. So there you have it. So you probably have the ACER papers if you're listening to this, so make sure you get one that you haven't done before. Might seem obvious, but I have had some people come to me and say, hey, I got this incredible score on the questions. I'm like, have you done them before? I'm like, yeah, I have. Well, it doesn't really count. So make sure the papers that you have not done before, make sure they're the ACER ones, and do them under exam timing. Just kind of taking your time through them gives you a skewed impression of the exam and your skills. It needs to be under strict exam timing. And so let's say you've done that for sections 1 and 3. And now what I'm going to share with you are 3 kind of levels you can be at. And these apply to both sections 1 and 3. So if you've done that ACER practice paper for sections 1 and 3 and you're scoring 80% correct or more on those papers under exam timing, then you're looking at probably a 70 plus on the GAMSAT for that section, depending on what happens on the day, right? This isn't some kind of guarantee or anything like that, but that's kind of generally what we've seen. If you're scoring 80% or more, or reliably or consistently, you're looking at 70 plus on the GAMSAT. It's not a 1-for-1 kind of a conversion. Some people come to me and they're like, Tom, I'm getting 65% on the ACE papers, so I'm kind of comfortable because I'm going to get 65 on GAMSAT. It doesn't work that way. You've got to lower that score a considerable amount, like 10 or 15 marks. Even if you do it under strict exam timing at home, there's a very, very, very like a whole range of factors why that's the case. But the point is, if you're getting 80% or more, you're looking at 70 on the GAMSAT or more. If you're getting 60 to 80% correct, it might be fluctuating. You're looking at somewhere between 50 and 70 range. I'd love to be more accurate, but that's kind of what you're looking like. So just to repeat that, if you're getting 60 to 80% correct on your ACE practice papers under strict exam timing, you're looking at somewhere between the 50 and 70 range on the GAMSAT. And if you're getting less than 60% correct on your practice papers, then you're looking at below 50 on the GAMSAT. All right, so if you're like, oh, I'm getting 55 to 60, I should be okay. No, that's probably a fail, unfortunately. Now, again, there's a broad brush strokes here. And it depends on what happens on the day, what questions you get, how everybody else performs, what questions you're doing, that kind of stuff. And so there are a whole myriad of kind of considerations here. But that's a general kind of rule of thumb that I would put out there for you to see, where you're at and what you need to do. So each of these, kind of depending on where you are, you're going to need to take different actions at this point before sections 1 and 3. Now, if you haven't done any practice papers at this point or under exam timing, and if you don't have the ACE practice papers or don't want to use them, head on over to our show notes, because I've got a section 1 and section 3 online practice test for you with full explanations of the answers, and we list off all the skills you need to have, all the knowledge you need to have to answer those questions correctly. So it's quite thorough, and you get a lot out of those. You can get that for free in the show notes. All right, so let's talk about what to do if you're in each of those groups at this point in your preparation. So if you're in the 80% plus group, at this point, excuse me, kind of keep doing what you've been doing. I don't know what you've been doing, what kind of study you've done, because obviously I haven't met you, but something is working because you're doing well there. So keep doing more of that. And what I would make sure that you're doing are timed practice tests. So under exam timing, going through it, kind of finessing your approach. Now, don't just mindlessly pound through them. That's not going to help. What we really want to do is then reflect on the answers and explanations once you've done them. Look at the questions you got wrong and pull it apart and go, okay, why did I get that wrong? What did they do that I didn't do? What can I add to my process or change to my process to improve it next time? And kind of think about kind of the thinking process behind that question. Now, that's not going to work for everyone. I just want to be really clear about this. This is for the people getting 80% or more. Because if you're getting less than that, or if you're just getting started and you try and do this, it's like asking a 7-year-old to learn maths by trying to decode a maths question. It's not going to work. You've got to start with the basics and work up to it. But if you're already getting 80% or more, we're refining and finessing things. So we're making sure that your timing is spot on, the way in which you're doing the paper on the screen and with the actual A4 pages that you have on your pen or the whiteboard that you're going to have. Just refining the process and looking over those explanations of the answers, looking at what you got wrong and why, but then also looking at what you got correct and making sure you got them correct for the right reasons. Oftentimes people might fluke it or guess it or not be sure. And again, you want to reflect on those and make sure that you're getting correct for the right reasons and just keep on doing that, as much of that as you can. Now for the people who are getting, 60, 80, less than 80%. And we'll talk about the people who are just getting started in a second as well. So if you're getting less than 80%, whether it's, 60, 50, whatever, we need to make changes to your study, right? Just doing more practice questions will not help. No matter what Reddit tells you, no matter what, the supposed other GAMSAT preparation companies tell you, that just pounding through more questions isn't going to help, because practice questions don't develop your skills. They test them, right? Let me repeat that. Practice questions don't develop your skills. They test them. Now, if you've already got the skills, doing more practice questions will help. But if you're getting less than 80%, you don't have the skills yet, right? And that's no criticism or anything. We just need to make some important adjustments. And I get passionate about this because people just keep on pounding their head against a brick wall, so to speak, when they just keep pounding through practice questions. That doesn't help. So, but then what also doesn't help is just trying to memorize science topics. Right, memorizing science topics. You're going to get questions in section 3 on topics you've never seen before and could never have prepared for. At least half will be on that. And the people who have done it before were nodding their heads going, yeah, I was shocked by that. Because let me give you an example. There have been questions in section 3 on the anatomy of the gills of a fish. There was a question recently on the body temperature of a platypus inside versus outside of the water. Now, you're not going to learn that in a science textbook, right? So it's more about shifting away from memorizing topics to focusing on skill development, right? And understanding how to pull apart and make sense of and use the stimulus material on any topic. So if you get the question on the anatomy of the gills of a fish, you're not overwhelmed going, what the hell's going on? But rather you go, all right, what's my first step? What's my second step? What's my third step? That's the kind of systematic skill that we're talking about here. And that's what's going to really help you to shift your scores and shift your abilities in section 3, but also section 1. So you need to really step back and focus on decoding that stimulus material. Now, if you want to dive deeper into this, go to the show notes. We have a training called Your GAMSAT Science Advantage. And that's going to talk about the science section, kind of reasoning skills and that kind of thing in there. And we'll put one for the science for section 1 in there as well. But the thing to remember here is that sections 1 and 3, they're not knowledge-based exams. It's not about applied knowledge so much either. No matter what ACE tell you, right? They recently released this video that was more confusing than anything else. And it kind of made me laugh because they kind of recommend stuff that is just like, guys, stick to, love you guys, but stick to making the actual exam because preparation is not your strong suit. There's this whole concept of, unconscious competence, conscious competence, and that kind of where you sometimes or unconscious incompetence. Maybe you've heard about that, but essentially, if you don't know that you don't know something, well, you just don't know. But then when you start, so that when you haven't heard of the GAMSAT, you don't know that you don't know about this exam because you've never heard of it. But then you come across it, you come across some information, you realize that you don't know. So it's conscious incompetence, like you don't know about that exam. Then you start to kind of focus on the different components, to understand the exam, how it works, what it's about. You start to develop conscious competence. So you're really consciously getting better at it. Then you get to a certain level of, and this applies to any skill really. You get to a certain level where it's called unconscious competence, where you don't even know what you're doing, but you're just nailing it. And there are some people who do the GAMSAT who don't even know how they're doing it well. They're just doing it well. And they're the people that get in the first time. They're like, oh, I just did some practice questions and I got this incredible score. Firstly, I'm like, I hate you guys because I have to work my ass off to get a great score. And secondly, they can't really teach you anything because it's that unconscious competence. They don't know why they write great essays. They just write great essays. They don't know why they figured out that section 3 question. They just did because that's how they always thought. And those people can't really help you because they just don't know how they know it. And I don't know this, but it's my belief that, or kind of prediction and assumption that the people that write the ACE papers are just these brilliant genius, some might say evil geniuses, who are just kind of unconsciously competent in how they do it. So they can't really break it down and teach someone else to do it. I mean, that's what we have spent the last 18 years doing, like literally the last 18 years. Because when I did the GAMSAT, the first time I screwed it up. Right. The second time I did better, but then I screwed up the interview. And so then the third time I did better on the GAMSAT. I did better on the interview and I got in because I had to become consciously competent to kind of figure out what worked and what didn't. And so what's really important here is through that whole journey over the last 18 years and the countless tutors that we've worked with, brilliant people who have, my favorite are the ones who have struggled with the GAMSAT before and then we're able to increase their score. Some people, when they apply for our jobs, they're a little bit embarrassed by that. I'm like, no, that's fantastic. Right? The fact that you were able to figure this thing out and get yourself over the line puts you at an advantage to the people who just did some practice questions and got in. Because what good can they? How can they help you, right? And a lot of the people that end up, tutoring online and doing these kind of prep things, they are in that situation where they're just like, I'm brilliant at this. I should just teach people. It's like, no, not quite. So anyway, that's a tangent. So let's go back to section 1 and section 3. These are skills-based exams, and this is what we've realized over the years of kind of working through this thing. So for section 1, you need to develop a strategy for working through the passages and questions, right? So a lot of people get stuck because they go, all right, there's a question. I'm going to start reading this two-page long stimulus material. And they're like, they get through it and they're like, I don't understand what I just read. And they go back to the beginning and they start reading it and they read a little slower this time. They look at the clock and they're running out of time. And they're like, oh crap, there's 5 questions. And they read the question and they go back to the stimulus material, right? So they've read the stimulus material 3 times now for 1 question, right? So you need to be focusing on developing a far more effective flow and process of how you attack the stimulus material and the question, and what you think about when you're reading the stimulus material. And this is what annoys me when ASA came out and said you should read widely for section 1. What the hell does that mean? What do you do when you're reading? Nobody knows, right? So it's a waste of time, especially at this time before the GAMSAT. You can't be out just reading widely, hoping that fingers crossed something works. No, you need to be very specific and systematic and purposeful. That's what you need to be focusing on now, is developing that stepwise process. What do you think about when you read that stimulus material? How do you do that? How do you pull it apart? That's the first thing. The second thing is you need to look deeper. A lot of people get stuck because they leave the exam and like, I feel good about that section 1. And they get the result and they're like, wow, that was bad. What went wrong there, Dr. Tom? Well, chances are they got the superficial meaning of the passage. They read the non-fiction or the fiction passage and they're like, I get what they're talking about. And then ASA, being the evil geniuses that they are, they put in answers for the people who only got a superficial understanding of the meaning, and that you pick that one, and that's the wrong answer, because you need to look deeper, far deeper into the nuances, into the implicit meanings, so the kind of reading between the lines, so to speak. And then there'll be an answer that reflects that. That's the key there. And just kind of the third point here is to be systematic about it. It's not just kind of relying on intuition, because I don't know about you, but I never had any section 1 intuition. I hoped to, but I didn't. English is my second language, so it wasn't a thing that, I mean, even now when my daughter, she's 7, she's in year 1, and she has better reading skills than I had probably in year 5. Like, it's crazy. She just intuitively is able to read words that I struggled for probably through all of primary school to figure out, because English is my second language. But so it's not about intuition; it's about being systematic with it. And if you want to do a deeper dive into that, go to the we call it our section 1 genius model in the show notes. Now for section 3, so like I mentioned before, you need to stop spending time memorizing science content. Like, people come to me and they're like, what are the formulas I need to know or memorize? I'm like, well, look, we try to avoid giving you, I know some people will give you a list of formulas to memorize. And that is like, I don't know. I think that's almost irresponsible of people to offer that. Because people go memorize those formulas and they're like, well, now I know these, but they don't. They just memorize them. And then the GAMSAT will give you the formula, but then they will pull it apart, pull in another formula, and create some sort of Frankenstein version of it. And you're like, well, I don't know. I just memorized the formula which they gave me here anyway. So it's about understanding, firstly, right? If you're going through any science content, it's about understanding and being able to pull it apart and use it. And that's kind of key. But At this stage before the GAMSAT, with a few weeks left, there is potentially an endless amount of science content you could be trying to understand. Now, depending if you're just getting started with the GAMSAT, I'll talk about you guys in just a second, but you might need to be doing that. But look, if you've been studying for a little while now, more science content is not going to make a difference, right? Now, pounding through practice questions mindlessly is not either. It may help if you start to pull them apart and look for the skills that you're missing. Right? But what's going to make all the difference is just kind of pulling back and going, all right, let's focus on skills here. And I know there's some of you already going, but Tom, what are these skills and how do I do it? Tell me more. Well, look, we have whole kind of lectures and courses on this in the boot camp, so I can't do that in a short podcast. You can do a deeper dive into it in the show notes, in the GAMSAT Science Advantage, but that's what's going to make the biggest difference in your Section 3 study at this point. Now, let's talk about the people who are just getting started at this point. Now, for the truth of the matter is, if you're just getting started, there isn't that much, maybe something will work out. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know you. Maybe you're one of these gifted people. I think too many people hope that they're one of those gifted people, but the vast majority of us human beings do need to study for a number of months to develop the knowledge and the skills to perform well here. So if you're only just getting started, there are a couple of things that are important to consider here. Firstly is you need to have more of you need to make the most of this exam. So don't just write it off and just go, I'll just go in there and see what happens. No, you need to work your butt off in the next few weeks. Even though it might not go very well, you need to work your ass off, because if you walk into that exam without having done any preparation, you've literally wasted that $500 odd. Because people will come to me and then they said, oh, Tom, I did the GAMSAT, I didn't prepare, I failed this section and I got a 60 in this section and a 50 in this section, so I'm good with section 2. I'm like, well, really? Because the problem is you got this kind of confidence because you feel like you did well in one section, but you don't actually know why you did well because you didn't prepare for it. So we don't know what actually works for you or what doesn't, and it's a big waste of money. So what I would recommend is to work your ass off over the next few weeks. Right. Implement everything that we talked about here. Focus on developing the skills and understanding more of the science knowledge, but with the look of having to do the September GAMSAT or the next GAMSAT, depending on when you're listening to this. It's not a write-off unless you stop studying. If you work your ass off and you still get a low score, that's okay, because you would have covered a lot of ground and learnt a lot of things that will help you for September. Right? If it were me, I would be working my ass off to try and make the most of it and then build on that for the next. That's the first thing. The second thing to consider is you've known that you're sitting this exam for the last at least month and a half, because the registrations, you registered, at least a month and a half ago. So you've known you had to study for this, but you've put it off. And I know that you've probably got a very good reason for that. Maybe you had work, maybe you got kids, maybe your boss was being a dick, or you had to do overtime, maybe you had travel or something. Now, I want to challenge you on that, because we have a lot of people who come to us who are in the boot camp who are working shift work, who are doing full-time work, who have kids, but they're putting in the study. And so for you guys, I think there's something going on underneath the surface. And I like to say that GAMSAT is about far more than just the physics and the poetry. It's also a test of your mindset, and it challenges our belief in ourselves and makes us question, am I good enough to actually do this? Can I even do this if I study? And, that happens underneath the surface, and then we tend to procrastinate or avoid the study by all these other important things. And I've seen that a lot, and a lot of people start there, and that's okay. But if you're going to get into medicine, and you most likely can do it if we make some changes, you're going to need to address what's going on underneath the surface there. And if you want help with that, you should go to our podcast episode number 3. You are smart enough. That's what it's called, episode number 3. All right, so common mistakes that people make at this point in their Section 1 preparation. So in Section 1, common mistakes is that they might see a passage that they've read before from a book that they've read before. If that's rare, but if it happens, people are like, I know what this book's about. I've read it. And then they answer the question based on their prior knowledge. And they get the question wrong. Because it's not about that. It's about what's right there in front of you in that passage. Right? So you need to forget everything else that you know about that passage or that kind of that play or that text or whatever it is, and focus just on what's in there, what's in front of you. That's the first thing. The other thing is to I've already mentioned, just taking the superficial meaning and not looking for the deeper layers. But just to kind of give you another one, what I would say is another mistake that people make at this point is worrying too much about poetry in Section 1. Poetry is a difficult topic, and it can take some time to improve it, and it becomes a question of cost versus benefit. Cost in terms of how much time you're going to invest in your poetry skills and how much you're going to get out of that, because you only get a handful of questions in Section 1 on it. Like if you're unlucky, you'll get 4 or 5 questions out of the 62 will be on poetry. You'll get far more on fiction and non-fiction. So it's a low yield kind of a topic to be focusing on this at this point. And the other mistake that people make is kind of worrying about not having much knowledge or experience with the humanities, or poetry or drama or fiction and non-fiction, because it's not about that. It's more about the strategies and the techniques to pull apart what's in front of you. So making sure that you are being really purposeful in the way that you read the passage, how you pull it apart, is going to make a big difference with that. And then Section 3, common mistakes, is getting stuck on a single question and just burning a lot of time. And this applies to Section 1 as well, right? Burning a lot of time on one passage or one kind of question in Sections 1 or 3. If you need to kind of divvy up the exam as to how much time you're going to spend on each question and on each kind of for let's say there's 3 questions. How much time are you going to give to that unit with the stimulus material in the question? You need to be really purposeful about that. And if you've reached the maximum time, mark down an answer. Make sure you make a note to come back to it and move on. It's okay to move on, because there are probably better questions down the track that you can get correct if you get to them. Right? You don't want to run out of time and miss out on those marks. The second common mistake that people make, and this applies to Section 1 and Section 3 as well. So just kind of working through the paper just from start to finish, from question 1 to question 62 or 75. Right? What's far better is to jump around. This might sound a little counterintuitive, because there are probably questions down further that you can answer more quickly, that you can answer correctly because you're more comfortable with them. So a big mistake that people make is just trying to work through 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. Another big mistake that people make is not getting used to the system and using the paper or the whiteboard that you have. Our tutors there's this weird new rule that they introduced in the GAMSAT, and our tutors rave about this new rule. And that new rule was that in the past that you were given a couple pieces of paper for the sections, for Sections 1 and Section 3, 2 pieces of paper, and you could write on that. That's where you do all your working out. But then they introduced this weird new rule which said that you can bring an A4 sized whiteboard and whiteboard markers and erasers in, and you can use that instead. And initially that was a bit like, well, saving paper, cool, but is it really worth your while? You're not really going to two pieces of paper isn't going to make a difference to the forest. But although some people say that, you don't go bankrupt by spending 90% of your income on one thing, it's through all those little expenditures here and there. And so, if we're burning through pieces of paper, a couple bits at a time, that might end up being a problem. But that's a tangent. But they brought in these whiteboards for whatever reason. You can bring in a whiteboard. And it seemed a bit weird, a bit quirky, but our tutors rave about this because you can quickly rub it out. You can quickly rub it out and move on to the next one, and you're saving a lot of time. With the pen and paper, you might run out of room. You're rubbing things out. You're not coming back to the working out for a previous question. If you have to come back to it with the whiteboard, you just kind of redo the working out. It's probably a good thing anyway. So that's a mistake that people make, is not kind of figuring out what works best for them with that and with the online platform. Another mistake for both sections is that is not testing out that online demo platform. I would highly recommend you play around with it. It is a bit peculiar in how it works. Maybe you've done it before, maybe you haven't, but they do change things from time to time without giving us a heads up, because they just do what they want over there at ASA. So that would be a mistake to not go through that and kind of get accustomed to that process. All right. Now, I've talked about people who are just the kind of people who are starting from now. Like, look, I touched on it earlier, but I want to kind of come back to it. There's only this is not an exam you can cram for. And I guess this is for everybody. If you're getting less than 80%, you can't cram for this exam. I do recommend you work your ass off in the next few weeks, but not for the purpose of cramming, but for the purpose of making the most of the time that you have left. And so if you're just getting started, work your butt off, and aim to be focusing on the next GAMS and really nailing that one. All right, but that's it for today. We kind of got a bit repetitive with a couple of things there, but I think I added a couple extra bits and pieces that I wasn't planning to anyway, so to kind of help you out along the way. But if you're feeling overwhelmed about this exam, about your skills, just remember you can do this. You're smart enough, right? You have the requirements to thrive. You just need to play the GAMSAT game, and the GAMSAT game is a skills-based game, right? It's all about your skills, not about memorizing formulas and science topics. So, re-listen to a couple of the bits and pieces here. Go to the show notes and get those resources that'll help you. But that's it for today. If this has been useful to you, recommend us to your mates. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. All the best with your exam.
Hey, I have a cool gift for you, just for listening to the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast. We do some of our best work in our Facebook group called, you guessed it, Nurses Doing GAMSAT. It's free to join, and every day we're sharing actionable guides, tips and tricks, and really just how to smash the exam and get into medicine. You can join today by searching Nurses Doing GAMSAT on Facebook. Thanks for listening to another episode, and I'll see you next time.